Welcome, everyone.
There we go.
Yep, should be going. All right, so it's been a while since I last recorded an episode for the new Paradigm Navigators. Half a year or something. I think maybe June was the last one, or May, before the symposium. So we have restarted our projects. We have a new symposium cooking, and we have plenty of sub-projects cooking as well, one of which is this podcast you're watching or listening to right now. And this year, I thought we'd start off with a really, I would say, wide but relevant topic or reach, and that the 4 E's in New Paradigm. And the 4 E's stand for education, economics, energy, and environment. So huge topics, all of them. We'll never be able to do justice to them, but I think it will be an interesting adventure nonetheless. And today I have with me Tobias, who is a new Paradigm Navigator. Hi.
Hi. I'm really looking forward to exploring these topics. They're very
Yeah.
rich topics. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, good to have you. And we'll be having Bruce as well, who was with us last year as well, although I didn't have the chance to record an episode with him then, so we can get acquainted with him as well this time. And before we jump into the topic, which will be one of these, which will be about education this time, I thought it would be good to get to know Tobias a little bit as well, introduce him to myself and you, the listeners. So I'll start off with how did you come to us, to New Paradigm Navigators, and how did you find out about, I guess, this new paradigm or science and spirituality?
So let's start. How did I find the new Paradigm Navigators? So that was last summer. I have been interested in spirituality for quite a while, but more like as an aside, listening a lot to podcasts, reading stuff like that on my own. So my main occupation, I've been in academia, working as a PhD student the past years and studying mathematics. But then last summer, I got really tired of my PhD position. Is probably one part of it, and I felt like I needed to make a change. And I also felt like I needed to find more like-minded people who shared my interest and the same passion that we need to sort of move on with this materialistic paradigm, which is so deeply rooted in academia, especially today, more than with like the common person, I feel. So I would say I've been listening to some different podcasts, and somehow I just searched one of them, like where he was speaking, and somehow I found the Science and Medical Network, and I discovered the new Paradigm Navigators. So I took a look at the members. I saw you and the rest there. I looked you up because I thought it would be cool just to reach out and see what kind of people you were. So the first one I did end up getting in touch with was Arabella. Because she had a podcast as well that I listened to, and I felt like we could have a lot in common. And I was also very curious about the university what she was studying at, the California Institute of Integral Studies, which I also discovered like, wow, there are such places in the world. I was so excited because I had no idea, that there were academic institutions like that. Anyhow, I emailed her and directly she just threw me in, connected me with
Mm-hmm.
Louise, and then I was suddenly a part of the new Paradigm Navigators. And I'm really happy to have found such an amazing community. It's really great.
Yeah,
Since then, I've been
good to have you.
getting yeah, thanks. I'm very happy about it, and that's I guess the rest is history since then.
Yeah, when I was, I don't know, like a bit more than 10 years ago, I remember just now when you shared that, I was also thinking that wouldn't it be great that if there were some schools like that, if there were some like institutions like that,
Yeah.
where you could where you could meet people like that and who are studying these
Yeah.
phenomena and
Mm.
really like working in this field. Yeah, it's been a great blessing for me too to find the SMN and people like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in the circle I've been in academia, I've been the one,
The crazy one.
arguing arguing with materialists, having debates about consciousness and stuff like that. But I've been the one,
Hmm.
mostly opponents. So it's good to have more people on the same team.
Yeah, yeah. And okay, so last summer you like found us. Um, but how did you like, I'll ask it this way, like what were the questions that kind of drove you to pushing away materialism or even just start questioning materialism? Like when did you
Mm,
start to doubt and why?
that's a great. So perhaps I can start to mention that I grew up in a family that was very open to spirituality and religion.
Ah, mm-hmm,
So I had that pretty much growing up. I went to a Waldorf school. My father's very
mm-hmm,
interested in Rudolf Steiner, so I got a lot of seeds planted, so to speak, in my upbringing, which I'm extremely grateful for. But in my teenage years, for various reasons, I felt like I got very influenced by figures like Richard Dawkins. I completely rejected everything to do with religion and spirituality. There's like no rational ground for believing this. I became very like
atheistic.
atheistic and materialistic in my thinking. And that lasted for quite some years, but I noticed after a while, this I mean, living in this worldview, I felt eventually was unlivable, and I think as part of me always realized this. But I had no rational way
Mm,
to justify opening myself to, you know, these wider perspectives than the narrow materialistic one. Uh, but I think the sort of gateway for me was consciousness, actually. Um, I was sort of searching for a while for like rational reasons to reject materialism, I think, because I did
mm-hmm,
not like living that, even though
mm-hmm,
it's complex. But I discovered David Chalmers and the hard problem of consciousness when I was
mm-hmm,
around 22. So it's 8 years ago, 23 maybe. Uh, and that I guess became like the stepping stone.
mm-hmm,
Like,
mm-hmm,
aha, there is, this crack in this way of thinking. And from there, it just, open up a lot
mm-hmm,
for me gradually since then.
mm-hmm,
Um, yeah, but I
mm-hmm,
would say that's the like initial point,
mm-hmm.
consciousness, this question.
Yeah, so you kind of needed like an academic uh entry point, I would say. I think I think
Yeah.
for me it was also similar. I mean, I kind of refused to stop believing in magic. So my first like I didn't have like a spiritual family, although they weren't like concretely atheist or religious either, but I first discovered like esoterics and different religions and such themes until I found like transpersonal psychology, which for me was that kind of academic like ground on which I could stand as well. Before that I was believing because I wanted to believe, but kind of after that I realized that okay, there's actual research, there's actual studies being done, there are ways to learn or study these things, experiment with these things, and you can actually, I think my first one was Stanislav Grof, uh, who I read like deep, and like his books, like really like you know scientific books, although a bit more on the archetypal side and psychological side. Uh, they were like the thickest books I had ever read so far. Like I didn't read Harry Potter or anything, but like his books were the first like 500-page books that I took up, and
Really? Wow.
yeah, and I couldn't put them down. I was even reading them in my school, during my classes. I
Oh.
was just quickly finishing whatever I had to do so I could go back to reading the real interesting stuff. And
That's really interesting. Can I just ask you, like, how
yeah.
were you just intuitively drawn to these books? Because it's something I read this book recently by James Hillman about like the acorn, that you have this calling, like
Hmm.
people in their upbringing are sometimes just drawn to things. They can't explain why. Is that also for you? You were
Yeah.
just drawn to these.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
I even miss like those times because back then I kind of had like a question pop up in my mind, and then I would go to the library and just find the book that would exactly answer that question. Without even like,
hmm,
researching or anything. I would just find the book, somehow related title. I would open it up, read it, and I would get an answer. And they were existential questions, many of them, like what is death, or what happens after dying, or
hmm,
what are we humans, and what is the soul, and so on. So yeah, I was attracted to these books, by this invisible force and interest. And and for Groff, he gave me the first kind of like base to stand up on, because he, like, in his private praxis, he did research, or like recorded, I would say, sessions with like over, I'm not sure how many like sessions he had himself, in thousands for sure, but like he even collected like um data from other professionals who had experienced then some kind of like parapsychological phenomena. And well, overall he collected about like 20,000 different sessions, and started to work with that data, and throughout
hmm,
these phenomena, these out of body experiences, these near-death experiences, people actually speaking with dead relatives, receiving answers, even like clairvoyance, all kinds of like like parapsychological or paranormal phenomena, um, and started to work with this data, and laid it out. And what I loved about Croft was that he wasn't like a preacher. He wasn't like
hmm.
political or even activist in any way. He was just very pure, very dry scientist. And he
Yeah.
never says like, the reality is such, or we should look at this from this angle. He just, says that, okay, I have this data, you draw your conclusions. This is what I found out, and very, very simple, very dry, but also like very articulate. And that's what I liked
Hmm.
about transpersonal psychology, that it's talking about these kind of spiritual phenomena, but it's also like very clear and very like precise wording and articulation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. I think similar for me. I mean, one of the things that, in my adolescence and so on, really drew me away from religion was, having these beliefs forced on you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, but then when it's presented like just raw data, pretty much,
Mm-hmm.
about these
Mm-hmm.
things, um, it's a whole different thing. And the same thing when
Mm-hmm.
I discovered all of this, it became increasingly puzzling to me how this materialist paradigm can be sustained, you know, in our culture when there's so much data like this from so many
Mm-hmm.
different sources, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a big like fire uh under the atheists as well. The fact that, you know, like these ultra religious or fundamentally religious people, they're like, you know, pushing their beliefs onto you, or, you know, accepting some assumptions without any like um questions, you know,
mm,
or
yeah, or any
doubt.
evidence. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yeah, and you know, that's what's, you know, pushing away. That's very like repulsive for me as well. You know, I want to make my
Mm,
own conclusions, and of course there are times when you must have faith. You know, you can't know everything. You can't kind of know God. Uh, Although some people claim to know. Uh,
yeah, at least not in that sense.
yeah,
Yeah, but you can
yeah,
have
oh,
these
yeah.
experiences still.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Yeah,
think.
that's one of my like. mm I would say even like practical beliefs as well. You know, I want to kind of let people know that you can have a spirituality outside of religion, that you can
Mm,
actually construct and extract or abstract your own beliefs through experiences, that you can have these experiences and then make up your mind, you know, what is this reality that we are in, or who am I, or you know, am I a soul or, with a body, or am I a body with this, you know, accident of a consciousness or something.
right. Yeah. Yeah, completely. And this is really how I see like a modern relationship to religion and spirituality should come from, you know, within yourself, examining
Hmm.
the evidence and, you know, using your own judgment rather than um, like it was a couple of centuries ago that you had some authority telling you what to believe. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's interesting that you never really had this materialist phase then in your life.
Uh, no, I mean, sure, like at one point, you know, your parents tell you that, or you find out that Santa isn't real, and
Yeah.
things like that just roll you over when you're like in the first or second grade. Um, and that happened. That was like terribly sad for me. But I think what I didn't like allow it to consume me. I didn't kind of I always had this doubt left in me that, you know, what if there actually are, you know, spirits and magic and things like that, and kind of somehow kept it alive in me until like in eighth grade, we did our first like Ouija boards and started like calling out spirits, and then we had some like I wouldn't say spooky, but like weird experiences. You know, one thing is when someone else is like holding the needle and, you know, asking questions and receiving answers or whatever. But
Mm.
another thing is like when you are holding it and you aren't moving it, you know, not consciously, and you're seeing the needle move and you're like, what the fuck is happening? This isn't me. That's that's kind of my first like crack
Ah,
and crack in the reality, or back into that magical worldview, and
yeah.
that kind of took me, you know, on the journey to reading about these things. You know, first it was like paranormal phenomena.
Ah, okay, that's
Yeah,
what set it off. Huh.
yeah. Bruce also joined us. Hey, welcome back, Bruce.
Hello, good tidings. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we just did a little intro, talked a bit about the topic, and then I started interviewing Tobias, and now we got kind of into how we started doubting like this materialist paradigm, and you know, what were the people who kind of inspired us, or questions that inspired us to look further than just the narrow materialism.
Yeah, it's great. I did hear the last few minutes, and to tie it into education as well, for me it was both. uh, and in school, never really in public school, American school system, never really fully engaged, never truly challenged, not knowing also that I needed to be challenged in these sorts of things. I had a profoundly uh, just lazy and approach. I was more interested in the things I was interested in, which I could find online at the time. This was the early 2000s, and I was fortunate enough to have a computer, and I spent a lot of time just on early internet resources and early Wikipedia and all sorts of things, just trying to learn and understand reality. And with that, I stumbled upon these notions of spirituality, just hearing, what a like 10-year-old, 12-year-old would hear about Buddhism, and like, all right, that's cool, but like, what is this all about? What do you mean the like death and rebirth and these sorts of things? And then I was exposed to Christianity for 3 years, going to church full time. I had moved around a lot. My father was in the military, and there was a time in middle school where I moved in with my grandparents who were very religious. I started going to Christian church with them. And for a number of years, it felt really good. I got really into it. There was something beautiful, something transcendent as I was reading about this Jesus figure and reading about these philosophies of love and unity and these sorts of things. But at the same time, I was surrounded by people who seem to be hypocrites and people who said one thing and preached one thing and then did the opposite behind closed doors. And as my awareness was increasing, 12, 13, 14 years old, and just like a teenager does, wants to rebel and be skeptical of these things. And then at the same time with the school system, not really feeling engaged and feeling like in some ways I'm being told lies, and just realizing, wait, the whole world is a lie, and things were confusing. And that led into many years of just kind of thinking that there's something beyond materialism, but no longer being sure of that or being sure of anything. And that led into, I guess, the next 10 years of just my early 20s, my youth, of being hedonistic, materialist, materialism, and I guess by extension that is materialistic, not thinking that I should try to be a better person and do these better things. I wasn't very inspired in school. I wasn't very inspired by the spiritual things I was learning. And so it took me a while to come back around to realize things are just very broken or inefficient. And not for everyone, but definitely for me. Things didn't resonate. And so I took a very individual path to try to synthesize what all these different religions were pointing at, because there seemed to be a common thread of love, of unity, and betterment. And yeah, it's took me a while to really come around. It was my later 20s now, in the last few years, where I don't know if I was a materialist, but I wasn't convinced of a transcendence until the recent years. And it was through that and realizing part of my purpose would be to help make education better. Education of the non-spiritual things, of just what school is just trying to teach us about being good humans in the world, but to integrate the spirituality as well, not to like preach and proselytize one way, but the openness of everyone's path is a bit different. And that goes for education, where some people are visual learners, some are more auditory, some need hands-on learning, some can just pick it up, as well as spiritual journey. It's very individualized.
What was the kind of breaking point for you when you came back to spirituality then?
It was sinking lower and lower into depression. It was that going all the way down, going into the abyss, and like finally losing hope. And it was really that turning point of nothing makes sense, and so I don't want to be here. And there was what I can only describe as a mystical experience of like all right, now I'm ready to, I had to know like pure darkness in order to now rise back into the light and have that frame of reference, not only for my own sake, but then perhaps to be able to help and assist others through my experience. But it was that profound, just going down into the abyss, almost like a hero's journey, to then come back out of that. And the experiences that I can't really describe. It was mystical. It did feel kind of insane. It did take me a number of months, even years, to fully process what it is, what it was. I'm fortunate that things turned out the way they did ultimately, that I was surrounded by people who could understand at least enough to not send me into a mental ward, for example, which happens far too often. And I really, really want to help. Oh, I'm not here to like change anyone, change society per se, but I would really love to help shift the narrative, shift the no, not even mainstream, just collective awareness that sometimes the spiritual path and spiritual journey is very intense for others. And if people aren't making sense, I don't know. I'm not here to advise. Like when it comes to mental institutions and psychotherapy and these sorts of things, I can only ever speak for myself, from myself. But what I really appreciate is that I was given months just to process things. I was doing some amount of work, and it definitely, I stress being in the world as well, doing physical, moving your body, not being entirely in your mind. The more that you sit in your mind, the more that you'll get stuck there. So having physical engagement with the world while processing that, there's still something I'm not quite able to be concise and articulate at this time of like, what is the best path? Because again, it's very highly individualized. There's just, it pains me when I have seen friends who went to a mental institution when really they just needed an ear. They just needed love and support around them.
Yeah, it's something that Groff also speaks or works with is the difference between like psychosis and mental illnesses and actual spiritual crisis. So I think he was the one to kind of coin the term spiritual crisis and to really make a sharp distinction between them. And there is and of course there is mental illness as well, and there is psychosis and neurosis and those things happen too, but they're actually quite different from like spiritual breakthroughs and or even like these deep depressive states, which can lead to both, of course. But what I definitely agree with is that or what we are lacking in education is to have people share these experiences. I remember I had like very, very brief, like basically one paragraph introduction into different religions in one of my classes, but I don't know, that lasted like a day or something. so so I agree that when we're talking about education, you can't shove your beliefs onto others. Doesn't matter if they're religious or atheist or spiritualist, but we can share experiences, and what I'd like to see is also that materialism be discussed as such, as an ism, as a certain frame, as a certain mindset, a very useful one, of course. We owe our radical technological development and a lot of good in the society to do that, but it shouldn't be like taken as obvious. And of course materialists should be able to speak their mind as much as spiritual people, but I really would have appreciated if we had some insight into actual experiences and not just descriptions and very short
Yeah,
ones.
I definitely agree with that. And just, it's somehow strange to me in education that all the focus is on, learning all these facts about the external world. but there's no attention paid to like, how do I deal with my inner life, which is a huge part of life, but there's nothing of that in the school curriculum, just to tie it to education. Yeah, which makes you feel quite lost to deal with all of that. And also, like you mentioned, Bruce, like the materialistic paradigm is so narrow that it's very destructive when it comes to treating mental illness, I think. There is so much to that there could be, you know, part of a spiritual process. I can relate a lot to your experience as well, you know, that I also had to go down to this really low, like touch the really dark place, if you can put it like that, in order to come back up and then reunite with something. But I think for many people that is almost a necessary process to go through that. But yeah, in our culture, we can probably mess a lot with such a process by wanting to, you know, remove the symptoms by various drugs or things like that. There's like no room for it in the way, you know, medicine views these things.
Absolutely. There is no education that I was exposed to formally about the hero's journey, for one. Maybe I just didn't take a high enough level literature class, English class, but I was never exposed to these sorts of things. And when I heard about people's journeys, maybe it didn't click. Maybe it just didn't filter through correctly. But I had no preparation of, yeah, you kind of need to struggle and know hardship in order to know light, or to know goodness. And that's not the best way to put it. And yeah, some amount of preparation would be really nice. Remo also wanted to go back. It was an important distinction you did make between spiritual crisis and mental illness. I can't, of course, speak on anything outside of myself. And while I am increasingly coming to a hypothesis, no conclusion, hypothesis that maybe most, if not all, I can't say all, but maybe most mental illnesses are in some way derived from some spiritual misalignment. That is not something I can say for a fact or like with full conviction, because it's very complex and I'm not very well learned and well studied. I know that what I experienced in many ways from ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia even could be used to describe certain phases of my life. And like pretty accurately. These aren't just like I'm throwing around these words. And yet I was able to heal through them through writing, through therapy, through some amount of natural medicine. And I know that healed for me, but again, was that just all of these things just a symptom of a spiritual crisis and not something I was born with? And these aren't things I can talk on. And so thank you for making that distinction.
Yeah, even, you know, if you look at some, let's say, frames in early psychology, you know, now we hear the term like subpersonalities. Before we used that term, you know, the first psychologists said spirits, you know, that we aren't one in our psychological makeup. You know, we aren't just one person or one thing, that we comprise of parts. And the best way to describe those parts would be to use the word spirits, really, because they aren't some kind of, you know, mechanistic, you know, gears, which was kind of one way to look at it in psychology, starting from Freud. But really, they're like, they have their own agenda, they have their own, you know, reasons to exist, and drives, and their own, you know, even personalities when you actually go to psychotherapy and use use certain techniques, you can speak with those parts, you can, you can have those parts even speak among themselves, and you being kind of the one watching, and if you would talk about this maybe with a contemporary, like very academic, very dry psychologist, he would say that, that's schizophrenia. But me too, as a as a therapist, I know, it's actually normal. It's actually what, all of us are from the inside, so yeah, what looks like schizophrenia to one person is just a healthy person to another. Of course, when these parts take you over, and if you can't really like fit, I wouldn't say fit into society, but can't take care of yourself or your family because of those parts, or if they really become like really like unbalanced, or one part starts to dominate the other ones, then that becomes a problem, of course. But yeah, but also, besides this, psychological makeup and just being a healthy person, and then, integrating these parts, um, which is an important, task, or um, important task in spirituality as well. There of course are like real psychosis, for example, when you take enough amphetamines, or when you give a person enough amphetamines, they can actually start to, hallucinate and have like really manic paranoia and so on. So there are these things as well, and it's for me, it's not too hard to distinguish. But I think big problem in our, like, the way we look at mental health and mental illness nowadays in medicine, I think the problem is tilted, to the other side, where professionals can't distinguish between like spiritual crises and mental problems.
And so I want to touch on what Tobias said, but immediately right there, what would be the recommended or suggested treatment for someone experiencing those withdrawal symptoms from amphetamines, that psychosis? Is it not time and space for the biochemistry to regulate?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, to stop taking amphetamines.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have that experience that feels, yeah, psychotic, and it's really just coming back into a homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, like Tobias, you mentioned in the same vein, with almost avoiding that inner delving through the use of drugs, through the use of these medicines, there's kind of two approaches I'm thinking about medicine in this way. There's I seem to have a problem, and we're going to take this pharmaceutical drug to regulate the chemistry in our brain to maybe get us to a normal state where we can work through it, but it may have an adverse effect of blocking the ability to work through it. And you may need to almost crack the lid open in the same way we were talking about the withdrawal symptoms of amphetamines. It's like you may have to go through this sort of psychosis, this hard, rough, delving into the abyss, this dark thing that you've been delaying and staving off for so long in order to reach like a light, or to be lightened, to be enlightened from the burden of the pain. And that's why the spiritual journey is often remarked as a hard and lonely path. It's something that is highly individual. It's something that takes tremendous effort and energy. And then there's the second use of medicines, of drugs, of just almost conscious avoidance of delving deep. We see this most with alcohol. I've seen this in, not good to name names, various people in my life and beyond, that they're like, seem to be fully aware that they are burying something they don't want to face. They even will say like, I don't want to process this. Like, I don't want to do this. And so they continue to consume alcohol or marijuana or these sorts of even harder drugs to not face it, and other people it's not so conscious. They're just doing it because it's fun and whatnot, but it's adding on to the list of things they need to work through. And so I
Yeah, I
just want to
think
bring it back to that natural path, that toward homeostasis, which can be rough. I think the example of with amphetamine withdrawal is great for that.
Yeah, I think this comes back to, emotional intelligence and or the lack of emotional education. Of course, some of us are more lucky with our, family, the parents we get, and some of us are more or less lucky, where we are born. But it's such a shame that we don't have that kind of education in our school systems. It's I don't know about you guys, but high school was fun and good mostly. Um, but elementary school and like the first like 9 grades, it's a really toxic place. It's really tough, and I'm not saying it should be all like, rainbows. In the school, we need to adapt and get stronger for the, world outside of us. And no matter how, you know, how lucky we are in our, immediate environment, there are still gonna be psychopaths out there who want to, get you or use you. So in that sense, I'm not saying we should be raised in foam, or with the pink glasses, but at the same time, it's really toxic, and the toxicity comes exactly from unprocessed emotions and lack of boundaries and all these emotional skills that are missing. So and and that's, I think, also what then leads to abusing drugs or escapism in one form or another, whether it's computer games or drugs or excessive sex or whatever it is for a person. This these abilities, these underdeveloped or undeveloped abilities to actually sit with your emotions and process different situations and to express your needs and to work with your traumas. And I'm not saying that you should do this alone, uh, although there are therapists out there. So that's, I would say, one of the best investments you can make in your life, period. But if we were taught these skills in the school, and there are, of course, I don't know, Tobias, you can share your experience. You were in an alternative school, so to speak, and there are better schools out there, but I guess the mainstream school system is quite lacking in this regard.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just thinking like how much change it would be if we would devote, say, 1 hour a week just to, teach young people to go inward and develop like a different relationship to their inner life. Um, because that is something that I would have liked to teach my younger self for sure. And yeah, I can speak to a little bit my experience. So I went to a Waldorf school for the first 6 years, until sixth grade, and I was fairly happy there. And this is, I mean, for those who don't know, it's more emphasis on maybe the arts, being in nature, being in touch with nature, things like this, and not so much intellectual like in a normal school. And this was really good for me. But after that, I changed to a conventional school. And after that, it was a lot of suffering for me. It was a very toxic place. So yeah, I developed a lot of anxiety, depression, and I had no clue how to deal with that. I didn't know what it was even. And another thing that is also a danger today, it was for me, is that it's so easy today to distract yourself from your inner life because you have, computers and telephone, like phones. Smartphones were coming like a few years after I was in elementary school. But yeah, so I think like it could be so worth it to introduce that into our school system again, because when I was in school there was no talk of that from high school onwards.
Yeah, easy to get into nihilism like that too,
Yeah,
we talked.
definitely. And that's actually also maybe part of the reason I was so attracted to this rationalistic way of thinking, because it's just in the head, so you kind of dissociate from your inner life in a way, I think. I think this is like one part of why I was so attracted to that, because it was so difficult for me to relate to the world around me and to the suffering I felt inside, or the pain. I had no clue how to do that.
Yeah, and having the role of parents also is extremely important, having good parents. And a lot of people don't have that privilege. And I'm not one to try to implement some sort of government policies on qualifying people to be parents and these sorts of things. There's like some people have that idea, that dream, but that gets into tricky territory. The best we can do is even educate adults. There's sort of a re-education, not in like a go to camp and be re-educated through this certain paradigm, but the continual learning that you never stop learning. And especially when it comes to parenthood, like most people have no clue and are just trying to figure it out. And if we could provide more of those resources and more encouragement to look into these resources and to have more hope and to work through these things, and for maybe some social programs to assist parents. There are some that exist, and I am in the US, and there are efforts to reduce funding and reduce their ability to help parents. And so I mentioned that because it's, yeah, some school, some education system, and also parents, which that is a microcosm of the society and the culture itself. And I can go on about that, but I'll leave it there. What do you guys think would be a good way to introduce in the education system these ideas of the spiritual journey, of going inward? You mentioned, Tobias, like, oh, we should have more of that. What might that look like, do you think?
It's a very good question, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that completely, but I guess like teaching just mindfulness, for example, is great. Just to, practice to go inward and practice those techniques to have a different relationship to your feelings and your thoughts. Just these basic things, I think, would do a lot of good. And yeah, just this essential things of how do you deal with your emotions. In our culture, it's also a lot like you're healthy if you're happy. That's like mental health on a superficial level, but of course that's not true. I mean, a part of life is, all of these emotions, and if you are taught not to express some of them, that can usually result in things like depression and anxiety, and it gets bottled up in your body and all of that, like trauma. Like learning about this at an earlier age, I think it would have been great for me. And just learning what is depression, what is anxiety, having a name for it even would have helped me a lot in those years, because I didn't have even a name for it until after high school even, I think, if I remember correctly. But yeah.
Yeah, my teacher,
I don't know, do you have any ideas?
My therapy teacher also, he said that, anxiety is, fear, really. We have these fancy names nowadays for all these conditions, but, we should make it simple. Anxiety really is fear for the future, where when you're, standing on really, unclear, or you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So, and depression is sadness. You're really sad. Like there's some kind of sadness inside you that you can't, express or feel some way, and so on. I would say that I think transpersonal psychology is pretty well equipped to be taught in schools, not in the sense of like teaching, people psychology or transpersonal psychology as such, although that would be good as well, as a like a something you can pick for you, but talking about these from like a scientific or like objective viewpoint, kind of like we talk about physics or biology, this is our current understanding of these phenomena. We can talk about these things. These things have been studied. These are the different experiences associated with those. So transpersonal, and it's not only psychology. It's actually been a long time since it was just psychology. It's the transpersonal kind of has developed into many other fields as well in the last 20 years and or even 30 years. But what it excels in is talking about this phenomena without like cultural, concrete cultural, baggage or names. You don't, you can say that, there is this concept of a god or of a supreme or transcendental, being or even principle, and in, Taoism, it's more of a principle. It's like a natural law, kind of like law of gravitation is, it's viewed more as a course for nature. You could even say, there are some parallels you can bring between evolution and Tao as such, or some people view this transcendental principle as the great spirit, indigenous peoples, or someone call it, Jehovah or Allah, and you can talk about those things, and you can also share that people have these, experiences, these religious experiences, these mystical experiences, and you can even induce those experiences and through different means, and people have done so ritualistically for freaking thousands of years up until our modern society, and even nowadays they do. And even in that regard, we don't we don't have to say to fifth graders, go somewhere and do drugs, but we can give them healthy preparation, or if that does happen, how to do it healthily, or give them knowledge of other ways of doing that, or healthy ways, and like you said, mindfulness, and there are these techniques that are quite safe, positive, without like with medicine, the medicine you're taking should have like the least amount of side effects and negative effects, and it should have positive effects against something. So in this way, also in transpersonal, we can actually look objectively at different methods to look inwards, or work with the inner world, and see what works across cultures, or interculturally. And kind of we could I think we could really present people with actual data and actual research we have, and of course you can spend years learning all of that, but just give even the basics, and I think a big step would be to let people know that you aren't crazy if you have these experiences, or if you were speaking to trees and plants and animals or spirits when you were a little child. So many of us have these experiences. I've had many people come to me, like, when I was like 6 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, I used to have this, spirit that I was talking to, or this tree that I talked to, or this animal, and then everything shut down. I thought that I was weird, or I've even, like, when I was working in school, I actually had, like, regular conversations with children who were, like in 4th or 5th grade, and they were actually really shut down and really like thinking they were somehow crazy or different or broken because they they had access to these voices or these experiences.
Yeah. So, and to follow up and combine what you both just said, I mentioned parents and parenting being a crucial part of it, as well as the education. Where I meant to go with that is due to the fact that there can often be not enough parental guidance, parents just not understanding the spiritual path themselves, and school helping to supplement that better education, better dissemination of this info is required, as well as a bit of a structural change too, in that right off the bat, at least in the US, the teacher to student ratio, one teacher to 20 plus students is not enough. It doesn't allow the teacher to actually listen and provide the other amount of support that this child might need. I'm thinking back.
Absolutely.
And if I just was heard a little bit more, but I couldn't necessarily by my teacher because she's very stressed, not only with the full workload of the pre-class preparation and after class and all the things and balancing their own life, but to be able to give enough intimate attention to 20 plus students is just impractical. And I think there needs to be a bit of a systems change, and that goes to the economy and how governments and institutions try to squeeze every dollar possible and aren't giving more value to the health and well-being and the development of the new generation of humans that are going to inherit and take over the civilization. There's just in general a massive problem of short-sightedness across the board. And so to give teachers better funding, to have more of them, to balance out the ratio a bit, in addition to disseminating this information of how you might have these experiences of talking to spirits and how you're not weird. And if they were able to provide more space to and yeah, to not, because I've had teachers who I knew I couldn't share anything outside of class information with them because they just don't wouldn't understand, and that was unfortunate. And there were guidance counselors, but there were 3 guidance counselors for 1,000 students. Like what? So there needs to be a systems change as well as in the educational curriculum.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I noticed also was that always people who came from like countryside, people who came from country schools, they seemed always healthier. Just overall like more like positive people and better socialized and had like less toxicity and mental issues. And later I realized it's precisely because of that, because in country schools, they often have less students, sometimes even like just 10 students for one teacher. And I think another thing that they usually they have like one teacher for the whole like 9 years or whatever they're studying there. They aren't changing teachers that like fast, and they have more like stable relationships and deeper and more trusting teacher to student relationships.
Yeah, and this is like really a human need, to have an adult that you can form a secure connection to, that listens to you and sees you and can help you, navigate in the world. And there's so many people who lack that. Maybe the parents are, divorced and have stressful jobs. And yeah, like you say, the teachers have too many students to have time to really see you, and there's just no resources for that. And like, what are you left with as a young person? You have your your peers to connect to, but they're really also very immature. And I know Gabor Mate talks about this, that this is like a big issue in how our society is structured as well, because it's so crucial to have that secure connection when you're growing up. Otherwise, your whole nervous system is gonna not develop in a healthy way if you do not have that. So it's so important.
On the other side as well, for teachers, it's the same. That's why we don't have teachers too. I think it's a vicious cycle. People don't want to become teachers because it's such a incredibly, unbearingly stressful job. And even like many people who do become teachers actually get burnt out, in their first 3 years, and many of them quit as well.
And very underfunded, which doesn't attract higher quality individuals to begin with. And those who are genuinely good people, well qualified to do it, who do make the sacrifice to do it, like you said, they just get burnt out. And eventually, they live in an economy where these things matter. And it's tough. Like in America, public school systems across the board, for the most part, teachers are buying school supplies for classroom use out of pocket. They're not getting, not only are they not getting paid much, but then they're also expected to go above and beyond. And it is just has reached a breaking point in this country for sure. And so, and on top of that, and on top of that, actually going back to what you mentioned, technology and distractions, Tobias, that like with all things, with the advent of technology, it could be good, it could be bad. And as it was kind of thrust upon us on society to just, okay, now figure it out. We're trying to figure out what is healthy integration of technology. Maybe it is actually learning the core material through online courses that can provide gamification elements and these sorts of things, and then convening in classrooms where the teachers can then mostly just provide guidance and assistance with homework and these sorts of things, as well as psychological support. I think that is a great way to do that. But I know as it stands, the way that a teacher is attempting to teach through one teaching style to all 20 students at the same time, it's boring to some people. You want to get your phone out and look under the desk and like look at tweets and things, which you're by extension learning too. You're learning a different kind of thing, but you're always learning no matter what. And that's just way more fun, like gamification and that fast amount of information. And so I do believe we are figuring it out collectively. It's just taking time, and this is a hard process. But the technology and the distractions are also taken away from the curriculum, and the curriculum not accommodating to different teaching styles.
Yeah,
or learning styles. Sorry.
That's a really good point. And I guess like the teaching style takes a long time for it to change. There's always a lag behind how fast the society develops and how fast the teaching style is catching up to that, I guess. And definitely technology could play a positive role. The problem is that a lot of the apps on the phone are designed to hack your dopamine system, and young people are especially vulnerable to that. And these companies just sees young people as commodities to make money out of. Education itself is seen increasingly that way too. That has a very destructive effect on young people. And just going back to Remo's comment as well about how unattractive like the teacher role is today, like you said as well, Bruce. I mean, I myself would perhaps have considered becoming a teacher if it wasn't like the system was like this. I know that I would never be able to be a teacher today in this system. And it's so interesting that it's like worldwide, the same crisis, like very similar is going on.
Yeah, in my opinion,
local.
Yeah, I think it appears to me that the best way to learn, the most effective way to learn, is when you're having fun learning.
Yeah.
And technology is fun. Games and interact, workshop type collaboration in the classroom itself is fun. And so, yeah, working through concepts of uncertainty, there's not a lot of assistance with that, especially with the standardized testing model. It's you must learn this and be able to prove your ability to learn that, and it just doesn't open. I was trying to bring it back to how to effectively teach this going inward, the spiritual journey. And I think it's through workshops where you creatively, almost in games, deal with uncertainty, and by the end of it, still not even reaching a conclusion, and allowing kids to be okay with the fact that there's not a conclusion now, there might be there, whereas it seemed upon reflection, which memory is not perfect, but upon reflection, it just seemed like there was no allowance for uncertainty and not having the answers immediately, that you were even made to feel stupid of if you didn't get it now and you're not getting it through this one teaching style, you're stupid. And so, yeah, Tobias, I think, would you be more willing to be a teacher if the students primarily learned material through like technology and well-designed, wisely designed apps and these sorts of things, and then you as a teacher would just be able to assist uh, in a helping with homework and these sorts of things? Or what kind of teaching style would you prefer to be in? If what would, yeah.
That's a very, very, very good question. I haven't like thought too much about what role technology could play in solving the situation. I think one big issue that like drew me away was that like teachers have such an administrative burden right now, like with grading, like the government. This is the situation in Sweden, and I think it's similar in a lot of other places. Gives you the criteria for passing someone, and it's like a ton of paperwork. You have very little autonomy in how you teach, and you have these standardized tests all the time, and the kids needs to pass the tests to move on with their lives. You're going to have parents attacking you if they don't, and it's I have a lot of people I know working as teachers that has, like you mentioned, they burn out in the system. So I think if teachers were given back, like the status of the occupation was raised, I think it's a very big, part of it, so that teachers are like given more trust that they can do their job, and use their own judgment to develop their teaching style, and also to some extent like what they teach as well. I think this tendency to want to control it from above, I think, is very destructive. So bringing that back, yeah, and then also part of it is also to have the space to actually relate to your students, so that you can actually give each student, personal feedback, not just a grade in the forehead, A, B, C, but some more personal connection through the years, or important aspects. Yeah, through Remo.
I think you raise really important things, both of you. I think the one being the administrative role and burden or load, and also the way we teach, or how we kind of use the teachers, and I actually want to, I don't know if you know about it, I want to introduce you to one kind of network of schools and one method. So what you were also, Bruce, talking about was, instead of having these, fixed answers and even like standardized tests, there's this method called the Socratic method. I think it developed in like business schools in Oxford or somewhere. And the premise is the same, that there isn't one right answer. There are problems that need to be solved, like real life problems, and these are like kind of the questions they are using as well. They aren't just philosophizing, they are taking actual problems. It started from law school, so they took actual like situations in that line of work, and then they give you the question, and if the students like are asking for guidance, you aren't giving them like right or wrong answers. You're giving them kind of like options. So like there is option A and option B. Which one would you choose? Or even if you don't know neither of them, then you go and research about them, and actually research both of them, and then arrive at your conclusion, and even explain your conclusion. And then also the teacher doesn't say like you were right or wrong, you should have took the other one, but they will actually say, okay, you chose this one, now this happens, this leads to this kind of development, or this kind of next question, next challenge, which is also what happens in life. There aren't kind of right or wrong answers, strictly speaking. There are just choices that lead to next or other choices, and that's one of their methods. The other thing, so this is the Socratic method, um, but the network of schools I was talking about is called Acton Universities or Acton Academies, Acton Schools. They started in America not too long ago. I don't think they're too old, maybe 20 years or something, and later they branched out to other places too. And the interesting thing about them is that they managed to create a system for education that requires basically only one or two adults to run an entire school. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think there are like 1,000 students in that school, probably, a couple hundred maybe. But basically the school is managed by all these teaching methods and projects. Teaching or like educational projects are run by students themselves, and the students themselves, they uh, grade each other, not even only on the subjects they're learning. There's like mentorship system, so like older kids are teaching younger kids and all of that. There's also the students, like and necessarily the students aren't only locked to their age group, so necessarily the students have older people, younger people, and even younger people like in a group, and they have these kinds of groups, and they aren't only grading the subjects, they're also grading communication skills. They're grading like your kind of personality, and there are methods to have that, to do that in a healthy way, not just like, oh, he's a bad one, blah 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 blah, kind of like blaming each other, but actually, having this accountability.
Yeah.
And when children learn that really young, you don't need to start punishing them, or have these kind of, lock them up somewhere, or start policing. You don't need to be authoritative. And that's one big point I wanted to bring as well, regarding that administrative overload and the method of teaching, is that, we are used to this kind of top-down authoritative stance that children can't understand shit. They need to be told like how to act, how to behave, what to learn, how to speak, when to go to toilet, how to step, and so on. There's like zero trust in the intelligence or emotional capacity of young people. And I think that's also like big burden on the whole system itself. Like it is so ineffective to run a system in this order, and or teacher, or like how is it called in English, this Well, basically where you have someone giving orders and someone following this this kind of way of, there's even like, this is also one method in entrepreneurship, but it's the worst one you can have. Like when you have to give exact orders to the person following you, it is so, time consuming, and the leader really doesn't have time to actually lead because he needs to, tell his workers when to go to toilet. It's insane, it's absolutely insane. It's like it's not even slavery. Yeah, it's not even slavery. It's like I don't know even what that is. It's just stupidity. And we don't need to have that. And lastly, I want to say that we can actually use technology to also come out of that, because in Acton schools as well, they are like using AI and like computers as much as possible in a positive way. For example, like I talked the last time when we were talking, that you can use AI nowadays for a while already to teach and study mathematics, because in this way you also have a um, personal approach, because the system, will know exactly where you are at with your knowledge, because it's constantly giving you challenges. It's gamified, you get your points, and you can always, pause, stop, rewind. You can go back to certain problems, and you know instead of like us, we had a really good math teacher, but he did a phenomenal job, but he had like 36 students,
Yeah. Yeah, and like part of like one of the reasons for permissioning the use of the bathroom is because they are trying to cram a lesson into everyone within a certain time frame, and if you go and miss a certain part, then you're going to need to like be filled back in, and whether it's asking students who are still trying to process that, or the teacher whose time is limited. Whereas if the education was primarily like per pace, for pacing for each individual student, that is just naturally eliminated. And then the teacher can be there to field questions as each person is progressing on their own, and the AI also assisting in that question answering.
Yeah, we have already gone like well over 1 hour, so I want to be kind of respectful for your time. So maybe let's bring this to a close. I realized that I would like to kind of tie this all together. Education is just one of the 4 E's, and we are also bringing in technology, which is a topic in its own. So I was thinking maybe we can, tie this conversation together, but maybe even continue next time a little bit like into the education, and kind of make a smooth transition into the other E's, because education, of course, is the groundwork for economy and environmental concern and so on. So maybe we can continue this in the next one, but also kind of I'll I'll give you a couple of statements if you want to add anything uh, to
Yeah,
this topic.
absolutely. I mentioned technology because ultimately all 4 E's are going to include technology based solutions, or at least partial technology, partial cultural solutions. And as we are navigating new paradigms, we are finding ways to emerge, usher in this paradigm of assistive technologies to offload the labor and the administrative duties of teachers, of transitioning also the economy and helping in environmental initiatives. And so technology I mentioned, of course, for that reason. And I think we had a wonderful discussion. This was great on education, which we will end up tapping back into the topic of education on the future episodes with the other E's, because all of these are related, as everything really is related. One big ecosystem.
Hey, 50.
The meta E.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this was we touched on a lot of very important topics today already. And yeah, education is so important, I think, to talk about, because yeah, the foundation for our society is laid there. And it is like a crisis in most countries of the world right now in education. So there's definitely like, we have to rethink how we do that. Yeah, we touched on a lot, but I think there's definitely, we could go on for another episode about this, for sure. And then there's higher education as well, which is also very important, which I have some experience of. So yeah, and I mean, these 4 E's, like you said, Bruce, might tie into each other, so we might jump back and forth a little bit, with the focus being on one of the E's at a time, maybe. And then, you know, other topics like mental health and technology will of course be aspects part of it. But yeah, thanks for a great discussion. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this one too. I think we not only like opened the topic and the bigger discussion, the meta E, but I think we really like touched on and laid out many of the problems. You know, we of course mentioned some solutions as well, but I think it's really important to get clear, get really sharp on what the actual issues are, what the actual problems are, and I'm really happy that you shared your own personal experience, that, you know, this isn't just only a philosophical or technical discussion. I think that's what really makes this community great, and these episodes and shows great as well. You know, there's a human element and there's a personal element involved. So yeah, I think we can. Gosh, and now I'm having all these ideas like popping into my head, all these
Yeah, we
unsaid
could
words,
go
like
on for
yeah, like research and like, you know, communication skills and everything that, you know, was lacking.
yeah.
But overall, again, I agree with you. I agree with Bruce that, you know, education is a lifelong journey, and, you know, the fact that, you know, our system is missing and underdeveloped, you know, that's something that we can bring to bear on our shoulders. That's something that we can fix, and you know, your life isn't ruined because you didn't have those things in our education system. It just means that there's much more to learn after the school. So yeah, thank you guys, thank you very much for this conversation. It's been a blast, and until the next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Until next time.
Until next time. Thank you.